guys, today we're going to look at authentication options in Zendesk. This is an issue that has been an issue for a while, and Thomas is kind enough to show us the options, and he's a wizard in the sense. So, and he's been doing a lot of digging, and let's see what we can learn from him today. So, Thomas, Mike, over to you.
Main thing we're going to discuss, in Zendesk, you have your Zendesk widget. When people start chatting to your team, they can say, hey, I'm Thomas, I enter my email address and my name, and then the conversation is moved to an agent and they can see who they're talking to. The main issue we've been seeing in the past in Zendesk is that if we want to pre-authenticate the user, meaning, well, we're on our website, we're on our web shop, we know it's me, Thomas, as a customer logging into the website, then you don't want to ask the customer to yet again give their name and email address in the Zendesk widget, because that would be like, well, you know who the customer is, you want to have a personal flow, you want to recognize them.
So I have to interrupt you 1 second because I want to understand it as well. So in the past, it used to be I log on the website, for example, on my web store or whatever, right, with my name and email, and I would use SSO to authenticate myself in Zendesk as well. But this used to work when I went to the Zendesk help center and I would be logged in there and I would see my requests and whatnot. Now in the widget, it's a bit different, right? That's the problem.
Yeah, indeed. So the Zendesk help center has a benefit that it's like a web-based flow. So if I click authenticate, I can use my Google login, I can use Twitter, social, or if you're a company with like your own single sign-on, you can link that to Zendesk to authenticate. For the widget, because that widget doesn't only live on the Zendesk help center, but could be on your website, your Shopify, wherever. Zendesk has like a new flow where you can basically provide a GWT web token to the widget, and that contains information about the user that's already logged in on, for example, your web shop. At that moment, when the widget launches, it will no longer ask for a name and an email, but it will just take whatever the website provided to the widget, and then the widget in Zendesk will know, hey, this is Thomas, he logged in. And if you have an active conversation, the nice thing is that even the conversation you had previously, maybe on your mobile phone or the day before, just opens in the widget and you can continue talking to the user. It's always been nice to set it up. It's a bit complex, but if you know how single sign-on works or your IT team knows it, then it's fairly trivial to set up. But before the new changes that were announced last week, the big issue we saw is that if we authenticate, so I have the widget, I'm authenticated, the widget knows, hey, this is Thomas, and you go to Zendesk, then sometimes my profile will be linked to the existing user in Zendesk, because maybe I already emailed to the company, I'm already a user there, I have a history. But sometimes agents would notice that, hey, this creates a new user, there's no email address linked to it, this is like a separate user in my Zendesk instance, and that created confusion. It's been a long community ask to fix that. If you go to the Zendesk community, everyone asks about that same issue. And on the dimension of, well, be careful what you wish for, Zendesk fixed the issue, but not in the way that we hoped they would fix it.
So in this, I see, you know that meme with Homer Simpson when he's like super fit, but in the back he's held together by some stitches, and he looks fit because he has all that extra skin. Do you know that meme? So this is what this is like, hey, we released this new feature, but it's like there's a lot of caveats. Whoopsie.
Yeah, indeed. No. So what Zendesk did to fix the issue, and basically we have to take one step backwards. What they introduced is the concept of like a verified email identity in Zendesk. The idea comes from, if you have a Zendesk widget, I type in Thomas, well, you can assume I'm Thomas, but I could even enter Dominic in your email address. And then for the agent, it's not very clear, is this the real Thomas that's entering his email address? Or am I pretending to be Dominic? Because anyone can enter an email address in chat and you immediately go to the agent and there is no validation there. With email, you don't really have that problem. If I email to a Zendesk instance, well, the email comes from me, so the agent knows, hey, that's the real email owner. So what they're doing with messaging now is for all new Zendesk customers. So if you have a new instance that you start today, you will get that. Old customers don't have it, you can enable it. The idea will be that they say, we have the idea of a verified email address. If you go to a Zendesk workspace, you see like an exclamation mark next to an email. If you send a link, then that email becomes verified, and then you know this is Thomas. If you use single sign-on, for instance, you have one login, Okta, OutZero, so one of those tools, you provision all your users, especially with employees, it's useful. Then those users will be verified, they have an external ID, and they have a checkbox. And what's changed now is, if I go to the Zendesk widget as like a guest user and I enter in Thomas, I enter in my email address and I press submit, then that will start a conversation with the agent, but there will be no email address linked to my user and it will not map to an existing user in Zendesk from that moment on. Why? Well, the agent cannot be sure that I'm me because anyone can enter the mail address. So they consider that like unverified. If the agent then does a check, they ask like, hey, can you give an order number to validate that I'm the real me, for example, they can still merge the users, works as before. Flip side, if you know the person, hey, I'm logged into my website, I'm logged into the web shop, and we pre-fill with the web token the authentication in the Zendesk widget. So the website tells the widget, hey, this is Thomas. I know it's Thomas because it's logged into the website. Then you will have what we call a verified user in Zendesk. They will get like a nice green checkbox. And if I already exist in Zendesk and this is important, the external ID and the email address matches, then my conversation will be added to the existing profile in Zendesk. Nice green checkbox, and all the history is linked together to that user.
So how do we do this?
How to do it? Well, there is 3 things that are needed for this to work. So 1, you need to create a JSON web token that says name, email address, external ID. And very important, this is new, there is an email verified is true setting. That wasn't there before. When you set up authenticated messaging a month ago, a year ago, you would never pass that token. So basically you need to update your messaging flow to set that setting. If that's there, what will happen is when I authenticate the user in the widget and the conversation starts, Zendesk will do is check. Is there a user with an external ID in Zendesk? Yes or no? If there is, they will see, does that user have the same mail address? If it does, well, everything is good. We can just link the conversation to the user and the agent sees me, all my information, my event timeline, everything is there. Things become complicated when you have an old Zendesk instance and you have a lot of users and not everything is there. For example, I'm logged in, I have my external ID, I have my mail address, and there is already a user in Zendesk with my mail address. Can we merge that? If the user is verified in Zendesk, then we know then that's the real Thomas in Zendesk, it's the real Thomas in messaging. Safe to merge. Imagine there is already a Thomas in Zendesk with an unverified mail address because we had chat in the past. We assume every Thomas, but not myself again, is the real one. Can we merge that? By default, Zendesk says no, because we only allow what they call taking ownership of verified user accounts, because that's the most safe flow there is. But if you have a lot of legacy stuff, you can do a fallback and say, hey, it's allowed to like, if you're authenticated and there is an unverified user in Zendesk already, let's just merge those two and take that one over. That's less safe because you want to be sure that if people log into the Zendesk portal later on and they see all the conversations, that they see only conversations that actually are from them. And then the last option that Zendesk has is what they say the most unsafe option, which ironically was the default in Zendesk up till a few weeks ago. That is, if you're not logged in Zendesk and you enter a mail address, we still allow you to like link to an existing profile. But I kind of recommend using the new default because that's if you want to ask how to set it up, that's the easiest one to set up and gives you the most trust. What you need is one, like I mentioned, a verified GWT token that you need to set up. Documentation on Zendesk is quite clear on that, and if you use like the big standards like a one login and Okta, you can just enable it. At that moment, user comes in and checks it. Second thing that I kind of recommend to do is if you already know your customers or your users, you work in a company, you have a setup for your facility or IT team, to import all your users and they're already in Zendesk with an external ID, your Active Directory ID, already there with an email address, and they're like known quantities. So the matchup is nice. For all the other scenarios, basically it will work as you expect. If a new customer logs in for the first time in messaging, you're kind of like a messaging first Zendesk instance. Well, the user doesn't exist yet in Zendesk, so Zendesk will just create it with verified check, external ID, and email. Next time that user logs into messaging again, there's a new conversation, well, everything matches up, he or she is there. If that user would like not log into the website and then just go to the portal and say, hey, I'm Dominic, I use my email address, I start chatting, that will create like a new profile in Zendesk with your name, the email will be in the conversation, and it's up to the agent to link it. And that's actually the same experience you have with Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram. If you go to Instagram and you start talking to a store, even though I'm me, that creates a new profile in Zendesk because there is no way to link a Facebook or Instagram profile to an email address unless the agent actually does it. So the new default the Zendesk has is messaging. It's just like a social channel. If you're not logged in, it will treat you as like a loose profile. Now I'm talking about it like very high level here and like most ideal scenario. I created together with people from Zendesk a flowchart, which used to be as big as my wall, but then we reduced and reduced and reduced. That kind of overlaps like all those scenarios. So all those scenarios of I have a logged in user and they exist in Zendesk, but the ID doesn't match. What happens? I have an external user in Zendesk that's logged in, but I already have another user with an email address in Zendesk. Which one do we link to? So all those scenarios, I've written them down in a flowchart, but we'll provide a link in the article or in any comments. That kind of explains all those flows. But the short gist of it is, if you want to link to profiles, just make sure you authenticate. If you authenticate, it will run as expected. If you're not capable of creating a logged in session because your website doesn't allow to, you don't want to spend the budget on setting that up. In that case, I would recommend falling back to the unsafe version, because that way it will work as it used to do today.
Meaning the unsafe one is to ask agents to manually merge tickets, right? Or how would they do it?
Well, the way it used to work in Zendesk up till last week is that if I open the Zendesk widget and I type in a mail address, that conversation will be linked to a user in Zendesk with that same mail address. That's not really safe for the things we mentioned earlier in the conversation, but if you don't allow for authentication and you don't set it up, then, well, there is no reason for you not to do it the other way. The moment you have authentication, I would jump to the most secure way to do it. As for merging, there's a few options there. So one would be your traditional merge in Zendesk. I click on the merge user option, I search for its name, I make sure that the email matches or whatever criteria is, and I merge and those conversations are merged together. That's one. The other would be you could also say I won't bother merging the conversations. I consider the conversations I have with the customer as like one-offs, in the sense that they have an issue, we fix it, they're happy, we move on. And the next time they have an issue, they open it. Really depends on the use case of your company. If you want to do a relationship with your customers and if it's the third time they contact you about returning a product, you kind of want to know that. So then that idea of merging users becomes important. If it's more like you have millions of customers and all the interactions are like one-offs, like your Uber Eats, for example, they don't really care if you contact them 10 times or 100 times, they just want to fix your issue, then I wouldn't bother merging them.
What would you say is the scenarios where it's imperative to have these authentications made correctly and made safe? Like in your experience, what would you say is the most required niche maybe to do this?
Well, looking at Zendesk market at the moment, if you look at your customer care experience, I would say anything that's like financial. If you're a bank, you want to know who your customer is. The chances are you use a Zendesk SDK in your mobile app already, so you kind of can piggyback on that authentication. That's one. Anything that has to do with like personal information, so your healthcare, maybe traveling, because that traveling involves security, social security number, go through security at the airport, for example. So all those things, I would say there it's imperative that you know who the customer is even in advance before you start talking to an agent, because just impersonation, phishing, all those kind of things. Anything to do with mobile sector. I've all heard the stories of people going into a store and replacing a SIM card, that kind of stuff. So you also want to know who they are. That's a scenario. Or web shops, there are other ways to know who a customer is. If I say I want to return my order, and the agent asks, can I get your email address and the order number? That's two pieces of information. If they enter it in their Shopify backend and they see it matches, then they know they're talking to the right person. So there, maybe the convenience of having the order number is easier than asking the customer each time to log in. On the other market, if you look at like more employee experience, anything to do with HR, I would also do that. So it's those markets.
Okay. So the safest one, how long would you say you need like time investment, for example, from your end, like a ballpark? What would you say the level of effort would be to make this secure so that, you know, people can actually use it without doubts?
There is two big pieces you need to set up. If you have your own IT in control, or if you have a good partner who knows your single sign-on tool, then you can basically tell them, hey, I need an endpoint that returns this kind of token format for me, and this is the data that we will send to you so you can return it. The customers I've worked with, or which we assisted, if their IT knows what they're doing, that's basically your 1 hour meeting where you explain that this is the gist of it, this is what we need. And then they say, yeah, well, we know how it works. Give us a week, and then they build it, and then the next sprint it comes back. Second part is, well, you have your token, but you also have your website. And if I'm logged in as Thomas on the website, I want to pass that information through the widget. There it really depends on how flexible your website is. If you have a Shopify or WordPress, like all the known SaaS tools, they all have like easy integrations with Zendesk to set that up. If you have a Zendesk Help Center, it's even easier. It's like 3 lines of code. But then you need something to hook that up. There also, if you tell the people from the website, hey, this is the JavaScript snippet that Zendesk provides to authenticate. It's a callback. Can you call that on the website and do that for us? That's also like a 1 hour meeting, and then depends on the website. And you only need those two pieces. So you need your single sign-on to generate the token, and you need your website to basically pass the logged in user to that token endpoint to get the widget. Third part I mentioned, like provisioning users, importing them into Zendesk, is not really needed, because if you just assume that people log into the website, open the widget, start talking to you, those users will be created automatically anyhow. The only thing where it becomes important is if you have an existing Zendesk instance with thousands of users, you might want to have a way to like update those, that all the emails are verified, have an external ID. That's the third part. So it's a matter of hours, and then it depends on how fast your partners are on building those tools.
I have this particular case with a client. They've been using Zendesk for, I don't know, maybe like 12 years, maybe more actually. They have about 80 clients, which those clients are part of organization. Now, each of these clients have, this is where it gets interesting, they have knowledge base articles that are specific to only them. So they created articles in the knowledge base based on this user segment, which is by organization. Okay, you're part of organization A, you see these articles. You're part of organization B, these articles, etc. These guys are unauthenticated. And the problem with the authentication now is the bot, the answer bot, is meant to give them answers based on what they logged in and what organization they're part of. Because if they serve them articles like all of them, they're not relevant, right? So they should be served only articles from, let's say, organization A, from this user segment, organization A. Have you encountered this kind of issue before?
Yeah, it is fixed now. So we've been talking about authentication as a way for agents to know who they're talking to in this conversation. But the nice thing is, if you authenticate the Zendesk widget, the widget behaves like your help center would.
Yeah.
So if I'm logged in as you, then I get access to the article. The bot will reply with the articles that I'm meant to be able to view at that moment.
So this is working by default. So if we get the authentication right and it works, then this should work by itself, right?
If you're authenticated, then it will work. So if you're not authenticated, then you're a guest user in the widget. Same as on your help center. If you're not logged in on the help center, you would only see like the public articles. And it's only when you log into the help center as Thomas from company X, Premium Plus in my way, then I would see the articles for me that are in that list. Widget acts the same way. I can go into the widget, start typing, will show public articles. If I call the widget and I say, hey, I'm Thomas, well, that's not authentication. That's just me entering a mail address. Will still show the public articles. The moment I'm authenticated, then that bot will return all the articles that I can see, and also the ones that are like locked behind like a segment or a security rule.
Oh, okay, good. So good to know. This update will solve this issue as well. Okay.
But there, it's important, you need to match to an existing user. If we go back to the discussion earlier that you need to have an external ID and a verified user, so that me is mapped to the real user in Zendesk, that needs to work, because it each time creates like a new user profile for me. That user profile will not be part of the organization. So there again, the idea of making sure that you pass the right ID, pass the right email becomes very important.
This client comes from a developer background, so they know what they're doing, and they went as far as like, oh, I need an app like a middleware that actually mixed and matches, my data on my backend with Zendesk, so it's a merge, and we know for sure, who this person is, and without, creating duplicate profiles and not overcomplicating their very long, Zendesk user base, because if they've been using it for 12 years, there's a lot of users, duplications, and they don't want to add more to that, right? They want to make things, organized and done well. So it creates the least amount of friction for agents, so they can just focus on their job and not just, who is this person? Oh, let me find, there's 5 profiles for this person. I wonder which one is the main one. That's a lot of time wasted. And it's also unproductive and makes agents like, I don't even want to touch this. So Thomas from Internal Notes, I forgot to mention we're in the presence of a celebrity here. So Thomas, is there anything else that you've maybe not mentioned and that you'd like the audience to know?
Well, with regards to this feature, we have an audience, so maybe they can push it forward. I really want to have Zendesk enable something else like a one-time validation. I mean, how cool it'd be if you open the Zendesk widget, you type your email address, that they will send you an email with a code, you pick that code in the widget, and you're authenticated. Because how nice an entire JSON Web Token flow is, it requires like somebody to build something outside of Zendesk. And we all know there are a lot of customers who only use Zendesk. So it would be nice to have the kind of like ad hoc validation in Zendesk. It's on the community like people can upvote it as like a request now. But that's one thing that I really want here.
Incoming stupid question, potential stupid question for me. I allow myself to be dumb so I can maybe not be dumb in the future. Can't this be done maybe with a trigger that, for example, you use liquid markup to create a randomizer and send a, like a random number to the person that just put their email address. The bot says, hey, we've sent you a number, a random number. Go to your email, please fetch that and paste it in here.
I've tried hacking it, but we have some chicken and egg problem where the ticket is only created after you enter your email address and not before. So that creates a kind of, you can't do any trigger stuff because you don't have a ticket yet. You only want to create a ticket once the user is there. So it's something that should be, in my opinion, native to fix this. But yeah, that's more like wishful thinking than an actual feature. Yeah, so that's one thing that I want to get out there because I really think it will make it easier for people to get started with this verification flow. For the flowchart that I mentioned, my first version had 92 different solutions in that flowchart. And I sent it to the product owner and I got a printout version from him back with a picture from his cell phone with like marker on it. And I went back and forth with him like 20 emails. Up till the point where he had whiteboard pictures from the Zendesk meeting rooms with his team drawing out the schema for me on how it would work.
You're already very invested in this.
Basically, everyone in our team has that chart now on their laptop, and if they have a customer with a question, they literally go like, that's the reason.
Is it possible you share that?
This is the flowchart where it basically says, okay, I have an identity, I'm authenticated with a true one, and there is an external ID and it's found, and it basically goes through all the like scenarios. Like you say, imagine I'm authenticated, but I still use the old one where it doesn't have that new payload, and then it creates a new user. Okay, user right one, but the external ID is available in Zendesk and I find it, and there is an existing user with the same mail address and I'm logged in. The unverified user becomes verified if there is, and that's also a tricky one. If there really is a user with that mail address and I have another user with external ID, then Zendesk will just take the mail address from that existing user, add it to my new user, and then I'm left with a dummy user in Zendesk without an email address. That's why I say the best flow is like the top one, because that's the easiest one to do. Like everything is like the one where everything is verified. That's the easiest one. Once you start playing around with those settings, then it becomes this kind of giant.
It looks complicated, but the devil is in the details, so you need complicated stuff to actually make things simpler.
For every customer that starts today in Zendesk and has and there you go as a partner say, hey, if you want to know who the customer is, set up verification, then it becomes a very easy flow. It's only for existing customers with a lot of legacy old data, because you probably also never bother verifying email addresses for your customers. It's like the email is there and that checkbox, nobody uses it, I think, that little exclamation point.
I know that it's there, and sometimes if I need to, I just verify it myself, but I don't do that for everyone. If I see it and it's there, like, oh, okay, let me do it. Let me verify it.
And they're also moving away from the idea that a user is an email address. They're moving towards a user is in Zendesk and they can have an email address, they can have a phone number, and the external ID and the user becomes more important than the email address almost now, which is like a complete shift from how it used to work.
Moving towards that idea of Zendesk profiles, right? So that profile is the main thing which holds a lot of data, which includes emails as well. So yeah, it doesn't revolve around the email. Okay, understood.
Yeah, and then the final one that is not public on the roadmap yet is if you're on an authenticated Zendesk widget, and then you have those 3 buttons on top where you can say move the conversation to WhatsApp. Soon you will get a free link. If I go to WhatsApp, then it won't create a new user, but my user profile in Zendesk will not only have the email address, but also the WhatsApp profile for that user, because it goes from Zendesk widget authenticated to WhatsApp, and then all those links are like quote unquote free. You don't need to merge those profiles anymore. So that's a nice thing that comes out of that.
Okay, good to know. Thank you so much for this very useful conversation, which many people are talking about and are asking about. I have people asking about this. I tell them that they need to have a web service, something that does things in a secure manner. They're not very open to the ideas, like, oh, again. I kept telling them like Zendesk is going to launch it, and they did, but it's still not. People expect that easy solution that you proposed, to have that authentication directly in the widgets, which should be part of, please confirm your email address with this code or whatever, which, to be fair, everybody does it. Any big SaaS company does that already, right? That they ask you to confirm your email over email. They give you a code in the email. Actually, this is kind of standard nowadays.
I think to go back to your analogy all the way at the beginning of the conversation, it's like that Homer Simpson thing where all the technical debt that Zendesk has throughout the years, I've got a feeling they're like week upon week are cleaning that one up, but that leaves like a lot of hidden dirty stuff in Zendesk for a while until they fix that. So I can only imagine that like in a few months time they'll handle that little part and then they'll move it forward and forward until it's fixed. But I'd rather have it them do it this way, where they like do a breaking change on one aspect today and then get feedback from everyone on the community, improve it, and then do a next change next month, and then they keep on improving it like they do with custom objects too. Then that they would do nothing for another year, and then after a year say, here, this perfectly packaged, and well, if you don't like it, it's here. This is more like work in progress gradually.
I appreciate that, and I have to admit, in the past 2 years there've been so many feature launches, you can barely keep up with everything, to be honest. So I'm very grateful for that. Say what you want, but the guys are really actually doing a good job. So, and they're obviously, invested in making the product better, which is great.
And it allows you to make movies on it and me to write about it on my blog. So
yeah, yay! Thank you, guys. All right, Thomas. So thank you so much for being on, and thank you so much for sharing this very useful information.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'll see you in the next one, because we're probably going to have other conversations around interesting topics in Zendesk. All right, I'll see you.
Bye.
Bye.